right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our pack meeting in January. We're going to talk about Pinewood Derby Mastery with Mr. Bill Klepper. There's a reason we chose that title, because this man has a wealth of knowledge about the Pinewood Derby. And some of it is, innate, I'm sure, that comes from his experience and the things he's learned in his travels. Some of it also comes from some pretty intense research online. And if you go online, there's a lot of people who spend a lot of time researching this. Bill has taken all that information and tried to boil it down to the basics of physics and woodworking. And the last several years, his boys' cars and a couple of the other boys who have had the privilege of working with them in their shop, prepping their own cars, have been in the top 10 every year. And I think the Kleppers have won or been in second place probably the last 4 or 5 years. At least one last 3. Okay. But trust me, Mr. Klepper knows his stuff. And his gracious spirit is willing to share all of his tools and tricks and stuff here today. We're not going to actually build the cars. You're not going to leave with a finished car. We're basically just going to introduce a lot of the concepts. Then we're going to hand out the cars, and we're going to do a little bit of some different pieces of it. So we'll talk about axle prep, and you get a chance to apply some of those techniques, work on your axles a little bit. But ultimately, you're going to take your kids home and work on them with your dad, your mom, your uncle, what have you. Then the race is, February 28th, I think. It's at the end of the month. So anyway, without any further ado, Mr. Klepper.
But one of the reasons that I get into stuff like Pinewood so much is the learning opportunity. So we have kind of a throwaway society, right? We buy everything prepackaged and pre-wrapped, and when it breaks, we throw it out. And our kids might not have the opportunities that we did growing up to get hands-on, to take an idea through its raw materials and its components to a finished product. And to fix things when they break, and to gain that experience. But I think it's critical because to be doers and creators and innovators and people who maintain continuous improvement, you've got to have that seed in your mind that you're capable of doing things, that you don't have to always be a consumer, that you can be a creator. Okay? Now, if you're going to do that, if you want to take those ideas and improve processes, you also have to learn why things work. So I love Pinewood because it's such a great opportunity for us to not just teach our kids how to use tools, but also to introduce the ideas of how this awesome universe of ours works. Kind of, I don't want to get into the math of it, but we can cover the concepts, right? So I want to focus on 2 things, and that's potential energy and friction, which comes down to 3 activities really, which is weight placement, alignment, and axle prep. And that's the gist of it. Everything else is just kind of a little bit great. So I need, it's hard for me to do this, I need a volunteer.
I need a sacrament.
You think? Okay. Hold that in one hand, like that. Hold that in the other hand, like that. Now you want them at the same level. Hold them out, and you want them at the same level, okay? Now I'm going to tell you to drop them. And when you drop them, try to drop them at the same time. And then guys, tell me which hits the floor first. Go ahead, drop.
Well done.
Did they hit the floor at the same time?
Yes.
Exactly. Why is that? Anybody know? Arizona.
Yeah.
Do you know?
In one of his laws.
Because of the gravitational constant, right? Because of the force of the pull of gravity.
Wait, but the basketball is bigger.
It doesn't matter what the mass is of the object, assuming that air resistance isn't a major factor. It's going to go faster and faster and faster. It's going to accelerate at the same rate, just like our cars accelerate as they're falling. As they're going down the track, essentially they're falling, right? So it turns out that the gravitational constant is 32 feet per second near the surface of the Earth. And dads, I know that there's a lot of kids, you might not get this, so I'm just trying to plant the seed with you guys so we can talk about this. So what this means is, if Sam drops a ball off top of a building, see, I drew a picture of Sam over there. It's green. And he drops a ball off top of a building. After 1 second, it's going to be going 32 feet per second. After 2 seconds, 64 feet per second. And then 96. And so on until splat. Right? So that's acceleration. We want our cars to accelerate, our center of mass to accelerate for as long as possible. So now let me talk to you about one other thing. Here, you're still my volunteer. Hold that ball. Now pull that ball right on top of that, directly on top of that. Okay, hold them out in front of you. You want to make sure you keep that right on top. And let go of both at the same time. Why did that do that? Why did that go flying off like that?
Because it bounced off the basketball
Okay.
and the basket, and it fell from a height distance.
Yep, yep.
And
This is one of the, go ahead.
and the tennis ball is really light, other than the basketball.
Exactly, exactly. This has much more mass than that. Okay. The force is mass times that acceleration we talked about. So when it hits, it compresses. All this kinetic energy becomes potential energy. And then it rebounds, and it transfers the kinetic energy from this greater mass to that lighter mass, and it goes flying off. Okay? When we raise our cars up to here, we're taking, thank you, Mr. James, for all this stored energy that I have. When I turn my stored energy into kinetic energy, I'm raising that up. See, energy, the law of conservation of energy says energy can't be destroyed, it can't be created, it can only be transformed. So I'm turning my kinetic energy into potential energy in this ball. Well, if I raise it up a little bit more, I'm expending a little bit more of my energy, and it's being transferred here to potential energy. The same thing happens when we raise our cars up. We want our center of mass to be as far up the track as possible, so we maximize that potential energy that's sitting up there. And then keep in mind, the distance from the front of the car to the finish line is the same for all the cars. So the differentiator is how far is that center of mass going to be descending for? And that's why we want it up the track as far as possible, without making the car unstable. And it turns out, for those of you who are keeping notes, it turns out that that sweet spot is 3/4 of an inch inside of the rear axle. So here's the rear axle. This is also the reason why, by the way, we want the short end up top. We want this to be the front of the car, this to be the back of the car, because we want to get that center of mass as far up here as we can. So we want our, here, this is Ben's car from last year, and you can pass this around and look at it, but you're going to see that that balance point is way back here. It's right about there. Okay, you guys can pass that around. Okay, so that covers weight. Now, who's tell me what friction is? Arizona.
Two objects moving together.
Yes, that's dry friction. In fact, if they're in motion, it's called dry kinetic friction. You know what kinetic means? It means in motion. What's the opposite of kinetic? The word called static, right? Static means not in motion, kinetic in motion. So, why is that not moving? Anybody understand why that's not moving? Okay, I've got the force of gravity trying to pretend this is a track, and this is my car. And that's trying to pull down that force of gravity. I've got my normal force of the track pushing up here, and I've got my force of static friction holding that in place. It's still not moving. Why is it not moving? Go ahead.
Because it doesn't have anything to make it move.
Because it doesn't have, well, the gravity wants to move it. The gravity is what wants, the force of gravity wants to make our cars go. The force of friction wants to make our cars slow. So right now I've got a vector, a force vector of gravity coming down here. I've got a normal force vector of the track here. And I've got a force vector of friction here. As I continue to tilt this, and that normal force vector goes this way, the combination of the gravity becomes such that it overcomes the force of friction, and eventually it will begin to slide. And now that's kinetic friction there. Okay, so what we want to do is think about, when we look at our cars, what are the sources of friction? Two surfaces rubbing against each other. Arizona.
The axle.
Okay, axle on the wheel.
On the inside word.
You have the wheel bore. Axle on the wheel board. How about the axle head against the wheel hub?
And then the wheel on the ground.
Wheel on the ground, that's called, well, we'll get to that in a second. Okay, also the inside of the wheel against the body. Okay, this is a critical thing. When you're building your cars, you want to tape off your axles and outside so you make sure you don't get any paint, primer, or adhesive on them. I'll show you. This is a car that's ready to paint. Okay, so it's all taped here. That's frog tape, by the way. That's better than the Scotch Blue painter's tape. It's the best thing you can get. Hello there. Thank you very much. There's a man who's done some painting. You guys want to pass that around, you can look at it. That's probably going to be Sam's car.
And what's the frog tape? What would you frog tape for otherwise?
It's a painter's tape.
Just a regular paint?
It's just the best painter's tape I've ever used. So you want to put it on there and make sure you don't get any paint, adhesive, like I said, primer, in your axles or on the outside.
Paint creates more pressure than the wood itself.
Yeah, exactly. Paint, it almost acts like an adhesive. It's almost like a glue, and it will really slow it down. So when you finally do peel off that tape, you're going to take some fine, like 220 sandpaper, or 400, and rub that wood down on the outside really good, and then take a piece of paper towel and some fine graphite. I don't use anything but regular dry graphite, no moly, nothing. And then grind it into the wood at each of the hub points, and you're good to go. Okay, now we have one more area of friction to think about. The track. The track, yes, we've got, that's true, sorry. You're right, the inside of the wheel against the rail.
Yeah, the rail.
Okay, so we want to try to limit that. It's hard to, you can't really get rid of it completely, but you want to limit it to alignment. And I've got 4 jigs, 4 pin saw vices, and bits here, so we have the time, if you guys want to do it, we can drill pilot holes into your axle slots for every block here before we leave. And it's going to make your lives so much easier. You're just going to be able to slide those axles right in. I know everybody has trouble with that, getting those axles in. Okay, the last thing to think about with regard to friction is air resistance. If you've studied fluid dynamics, it's called skin friction. Heard of that before, but it's the friction of the air against the body. And there's an awesome site out there called PinewoodDerbyPhysics.com. They have 17, 18 different lectures out there, and one of them goes over the center of mass effect, the coefficient of drag effect. That difference between that car, Sam's car, and a block is worth a third of a car length. The difference between the axles, depending on how the axles are done, that can be anywhere from 1 to 2 car lengths. Okay? The alignment is worth half a car length. The weight placement is worth half to a full car length. But all the empirical data is out there. They've done the grunt work for you. And for those of you who are interested in the math, I actually brought some sheets with me. Most folks will just have post-traumatic stress disorder, probably by seeing this stuff, but I have them here if you're interested. So I figured I would demonstrate how to prep an axle and get you guys started on putting in the pilot holes. Let's see if we can get some stuff done. Right. And take a look at the stuff that's up here, guys. You're not expected to learn it, but understand that there's a lot that you can take away from this project. It's not just about building a car and seeing a race. That's why we did it. Good so far?
Great. Klepper, we did that.
Most of the blocks are good. However, occasionally there's a dud. I want you to take your blocks when you get them on a flat surface, put your fingers edge to edge, and make sure that they don't significantly rock. If they do, your block is warped, and you're going to have a high wheel. You're going to end up having to bend an axle.